The air in the Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Cinder was a tangible thing, a thick cocktail of competing elements. It tasted of grit that had defeated 1,000 filters, of the metallic tang of overworked electronics, and the lingering ghost of burnt coffee brewed hours before dawn. Sounds layered themselves into a low, perpetual hum. The drone of servers, the whisper of industrial air conditioning fighting a losing war against the desert, the distant, muffled thud of a heavy-lift helicopter departing the wire. On the main screen, a topographical map of the province glowed in shades of digital green and ochre, a sterile representation of the lethal terrain just beyond the HESCO barriers. Dust motes, ancient and fine, danced like constellations in the beams of the overhead projectors, each a tiny world indifferent to the immense strategic weight of the information displayed below. This room was the brain of the FOB, a nexus of steel, wire, and will, where decisions made in cool, conditioned air translated directly into heat, sweat, and blood under an unforgiving sun. In a corner, away from the central cluster of command consoles where the on-duty watch team murmured into their headsets, a woman sat alone. She was an island of stillness in the room's quiet current of activity. To a casual observer, she was utterly unremarkable, a study in deliberate anonymity. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, though the harsh lighting and a palpable weariness etched into the corners of her eyes could have added or subtracted a decade. Her hair, a nondescript brown with hints of gray at the temples, was pulled back in a severe, functional bun. She wore simple civilian attire that seemed chosen for its utter lack of distinction. Olive cargo pants, scuffed but sturdy boots, and a plain, dark gray t-shirt that fit loosely over a compact frame. There was no rank insignia, no unit patch, no name tag. She was not hunched over her console, but sat with a ramrod-straight posture that seemed incongruous with her tired expression, a posture of ingrained, forgotten discipline. On the small screen before her, she scrolled through dense columns of logistics data, fuel consumption rates, ammunition inventories, water purification outputs, with an unnerving, focused placidity, her expression unchanging, as if she were reading a mildly interesting novel rather than the vital signs of a military installation on the edge of the world. The door to the TOC hissed open, cleaving the delicate balance of the room's atmosphere. Master Sergeant Frank Miller entered, and the ambient pressure in the room immediately changed. Where the woman was a void of presence, Miller was a supernova of it. He was a man built from the spare parts of military tradition, his face a roadmap of scowls and sun creases, his barrel chest straining the fabric of his perfectly starched desert camouflage uniform. He was the senior enlisted NCO of the operations section, and he wore the authority of his position not like a uniform, but like a second skin. The TOC was his kingdom, the junior soldiers his subjects, and the steady, predictable rhythm of the watch his personal symphony. His voice, a gravelly baritone honed by years of shouting over engine noise and firing ranges, boomed into the space, shattering the quiet concentration. "Afternoon, warriors. Captain's still trying to figure out which end of the map is up, I see." A few of the younger specialists chuckled nervously, their eyes flicking towards the junior officer at the main console, a young captain whose flush of embarrassment was visible even from across the room. Miller thrived on this. His confidence was a fortress built on the small insecurities of others. He strode through the center of the room, his boots making a sound of crisp authority on the linoleum floor tiles. He slapped a sergeant on the back, checked a logbook with a cursory, dismissive glance, and adjusted a flickering monitor with the proprietary irritation of a homeowner fixing a leaky faucet. His domain was in order. His world was as it should be. And then, his eyes, sweeping his kingdom for any imperfection, any deviation from the norm, landed on the woman in the corner. He stopped dead, his brow furrowed, a precursor to a storm of institutional outrage. Who was this? This was a secure area. This was the nerve center. Civilians weren't just allowed to wander in and play on the terminals. He saw a small, unassuming woman in civilian clothes, where a soldier in uniform should be. He saw an anomaly, an error, a challenge to his control. His mind, a machine tuned to the simple binaries of rank and regulation, processed the visual data and arrived at a swift, flawed, and absolute conclusion. She was a problem to be corrected. He did not approach her quietly. He did not seek out the watch officer to inquire. Such actions would have implied a question, and Master Sergeant Miller's worldview had little room for questions. He dealt in statements, in corrections, in the loud and public reassertion of order. He marched towards her corner, his path carving a wake of nervous silence among the other soldiers. They could feel the shift in the air, the focusing of Miller's formidable, often misplaced intensity. They turned in their chairs, not daring to seem too interested, but utterly unable to look away. The young captain at the main console looked up, his expression a mixture of apprehension and a strange, unvoiced hope that this confrontation might somehow pass him by. The master sergeant came to a halt directly behind her chair, planting his hands on his hips in a classic pose of unimpeachable authority. He loomed over her, a mountain of righteous indignation. "Excuse me," he began, his voice dripping with the kind of exaggerated, condescending patience one might use on a lost child. The woman did not move. She did not flinch. She did not turn. Her eyes remained fixed on the columns of data scrolling up her screen. Her focus was so absolute it seemed to be a physical barrier. Miller's jaw tightened. Being ignored was a foreign concept to him, an intolerable one. He leaned in closer, his voice growing louder, sharper, designed now not just to get her attention, but to broadcast his authority to the entire room. "I said, excuse me, this is a restricted area, a tactical operations center, not a USO lounge, so I'm going to ask you one time, politely." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his rank settle over the silent room. "Who let you in here?" The woman finished her scroll. She tapped the screen once, twice, with a delicate precision. Then, without turning her head, without shifting her posture, she raised her left hand, palm outward, and held up a single, slender finger. It was not a rude gesture. It was a clinical one. A universal sign for one moment, for processing, for do not interrupt. It was the kind of gesture a surgeon might make in the middle of a critical suture, a dismissal so complete and so impersonal that it was, in its own way, more insulting than any curse. It communicated that he was not only unimportant, but was an inconvenient distraction from work that was demonstrably more vital than his entire existence. For a man like Master Sergeant Miller, a man whose entire sense of self was built on the foundation of being seen, heard, and immediately obeyed, this was like a splash of cold water to the face. It was incomprehensible. His face, already flushed with authority, deepened to a shade of mottled crimson. The muscles in his neck corded. The low, nervous hum of the room seemed to drop an octave as everyone held their breath. "Did you just shush me?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous now. The condescension was gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered fury. He was a predator whose prey had refused to acknowledge its role. He took another step, invading her personal space, his shadow falling completely over her and her small console. You think you can just walk in here, into my TOC, and ignore a master sergeant? Who the hell do you think you are? Some journalist? Some contractor who thinks the rules don't apply to her? He gestured around the room with a sweep of his arm. These are soldiers. This is a place of war. We have procedures. We have protocols. And none of them involve some random woman playing on our systems. He was working himself into a full-blown tirade, his voice rising with each sentence. The performance as much for the benefit of his audience as for the woman herself. He needed to re-establish the hierarchy he felt had been so flagrantly violated. He was the guardian of the gate, and she was the interloper. I want a name, and I want it now. And then you're going to be escorted to the front gate, and I'm going to have a long talk with whoever was stupid enough to sign you in. To punctuate his demand, to add a physical dimension to his verbal assault, he slammed his hand down flat on the desk beside her keyboard. The sound was a miniature explosion in the tense silence, a crack that made several of the younger soldiers jump in their seats. The plastic desk shuddered. The pens in a nearby cup rattled. It was a juvenile, theatrical display of physical dominance, the last resort of a man whose authority was failing him. The woman did not startle. The only part of her that moved was her head, which tilted almost imperceptibly to the side. She slowly, deliberately turned from her screen. She did not look at his face. Her gaze fell upon the large, meaty hand planted on her desk. She looked at it for a long, silent moment, her expression one of mild curiosity, as if observing a peculiar species of fungus that had unexpectedly sprouted on her workspace. Then, her eyes, a cool and unsettling shade of gray, traveled slowly up his arm, over the bulging bicep, past the Master Sergeant chevrons on his sleeve, until they finally met his. The room held its breath. There was no fear in her eyes. There was no anger. There was no emotion at all. There was only a vast, empty stillness, a profound and unnerving calm that seemed to absorb his rage like a vacuum. It was the look of a lioness allowing a jackal to dance at the edge of its kill radius, not out of tolerance, but out of a complete and total certainty of the outcome. "Master Sergeant," she said. Her voice was quiet, low, and perfectly even, yet it cut through the room with more authority than all of his shouting. It was a voice that did not need to be raised. "You are making a scene." It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the flat intonation of a weather report. "And you have put a smudge on my desk." She looked back at the spot where his hand had been. He snatched it back as if the surface had suddenly become white-hot. A faint, greasy handprint marred the gray plastic. Before he could formulate a response, before his rage-addled brain could process the sheer audacity of her reply, the world ended. It began not with a bang, but with a piercing, electronic shriek that clawed at the ears. Red lights began to flash on the walls, bathing the room in an apocalyptic crimson pulse. On the main screen, the tranquil green and ochre map was replaced by a flashing red banner, the text stark and brutal. "Imminent weather advisory, sector-wide. Haboob formation detected. Projected winds 120 kilometers per hour. Estimated time to impact, 12 minutes. A collective gasp went through the room. 12 minutes. A haboob, a true desert monster, a moving mountain of sand and fury, was not something you prepared for in 12 minutes. Standard procedure called for hours of lockdown, of securing equipment, of moving personnel. 12 minutes was not a preparation window. It was a death sentence for anything not battened down. The distant, ambient sounds from outside were already changing. The low whistle of the wind was rising in pitch, becoming a hungry moan. Chaos erupted. The young captain, jolted out of his stupor, began shouting orders, his voice cracking with panic. "Okay, initiate lockdown protocols. Bravo 7, I need everyone to check your sector assignments. Get on the net. Notify all section chiefs." His orders were textbook, standard, and utterly inadequate for the speed and scale of the approaching catastrophe. He was a student trying to solve a quantum physics problem with a first-grade multiplication table. Master Sergeant Miller, his personal drama instantly forgotten, reverted to his own brand of command. Pure, unadulterated volume. "Move! You heard the captain! Move! I want comms checks with every outpost, now! Security platoon, get your men to the bunkers! Why are you still sitting there, Jenkins?" He was a whirlwind of frantic, undirected energy, his shouting adding to the noise and confusion rather than dispelling it. The junior soldiers, caught between the captain's panicked uncertainty and Miller's furious bluster, began to move with a jittery, inefficient haste, their actions bordering on panic. The brain of the FOB was having a seizure, and in the corner, the woman stood up. The movement was not sudden or jerky. It was a fluid, economical unfolding, like a complex tool being deployed. The weariness she had worn like a cloak simply evaporated, sloughing off her to reveal something hard, polished, and immensely powerful beneath. Her previous anonymity vanished, replaced by an aura of absolute, terrifying purpose. Her eyes, no longer calm and observant, now burned with an incisive, analytical fire. She took 3 long, swift strides that carried her from her forgotten corner to the epicenter of the chaos. The main command console where the flustered captain stood, paralyzed by indecision. She did not shove him aside. She simply occupied the space next to him, her presence so overwhelming that he instinctively took a half-step back, ceding the ground without a conscious thought. She placed her hands on the console, her fingers hovering over the controls for a moment, as if reacquainting herself with an old and intimate friend. "Lights," she said. Her voice was the same quiet, even tone as before, but now it was imbued with a quality of command so pure and undeniable that it sliced through the panic like a surgeon's scalpel through flesh. The effect was instantaneous. The shouting stopped. Miller, mid-bellow, clamped his jaw shut. The soldiers froze, their heads turning as one towards the source of this new, calm authority. "Give me primary illumination. Kill the strobes. I need to see the ancillary readouts, not have a seizure." A specialist, his hands trembling slightly, tapped a command into his keyboard. The flashing red emergency lights died, replaced by the steady, clinical white of the main overheads. The room felt saner already. "Comms," she continued, her eyes scanning a dozen different data streams at once, her brain seemingly processing them all in parallel. "Patch me through to Tower, Base Engineering, and the Aviation Component Commander. Conference call, now." The comms sergeant, a veteran with 15 years of experience, fumbled for a moment, shocked by the sheer audacity of the command. Civilians didn't order military conference calls, but there was something in her voice, a complete lack of doubt, that compelled obedience. His fingers flew across his console. "Patching now, ma'am." The use of ma'am was reflexive, an instinctual recognition of authority that transcended uniform. 3 voices, tinny and laced with their own panic, crackled to life over the main speakers. "This is Tower. We're evacuating. Who is this?" "Engineering, go ahead." Aviation Command. We're trying to get birds on the ground. Make it fast. The woman leaned forward, her voice dropping into a register of pure, concentrated expertise. This is the FOBTOC. Stop what you are doing and listen. Tower, I want an immediate wind shear and barometric pressure reading every 30 seconds. Broadcast on the command net. Do not evacuate your personnel until the anemometer reads 100 kilometers per hour. You have reinforced glass. You'll be more useful there than in a bunker. Engineering, kill power to all non-essential sectors. I want all available grid power rerouted to the hospital's primary and secondary generators and the C4I server farm. Then, I want you to depressurize all JP8 fuel bladders to 50% capacity. You will not have time to move them, so we prevent them from rupturing. Aviation. What's the status of Task Force Raptor? The string of orders was a masterpiece of crisis management, a cascade of complex interlocking commands that addressed problems the captain and Miller hadn't even conceived of yet. Depressurizing fuel bladders to prevent catastrophic explosion from pressure differential. Rerouting power not just to the hospital, but to the intelligence servers to prevent data loss. It was a level of foresight that was almost supernatural. The omniscient narrator could see the gears turning in her mind. She was playing chess with a hurricane, thinking 10 moves ahead. Each command was a precise, calculated defense against a specific threat the storm would pose. She was not just reacting, she was anticipating. The voice from Aviation Command crackled back, laced with confusion. Task Force Raptor is 4 AH-64 Apaches, currently 8 minutes out, trying to beat the storm home. They won't make it. Negative, the woman stated, her voice flat and absolute. They will not try to make it. You will vector them to grid coordinate 497.32. There is a granite rock formation there, a small canyon. They will land inside it, nose to tail, and power down. The rock will shelter them from the worst of the wind. They will ride it out on the ground. There was a stunned silence from the speaker. Ma'am, who is this? That's a classified flight path. How do you know about that canyon? I know about it because I authorized the geological survey that mapped it 3 years ago for this exact contingency, she replied, without a trace of arrogance. It was a simple statement of fact. Now vector your pilots. She turned her attention back to the room. The chaos was gone. In its place was a stunned, focused silence. Every soldier in the TOC was now looking at her, their expressions a mixture of awe, confusion, and dawning comprehension. They had been a panicked mob. She had, in the space of 90 seconds, forged them into a single, efficient weapon. She pointed a finger at the logistics NCO. You. Give me a real-time inventory of all P-tracks and forklift assets. I want every available vehicle moved to the north-facing wall of the maintenance bay. They'll act as a secondary windbreak for the temporary shelters behind it. She then pointed to a communications specialist. You. Get me a link to the SWIOPS detachment. I want them to start broadcasting on all internal channels. Calm, reassuring messages. Tell people to stay in place, that the situation is under control. Panic is a force multiplier we don't need. Master Sergeant Miller stood frozen, a statue of obsolete authority. His face, which had been a mask of fury just minutes before, was now slack with utter disbelief. His world had been turned upside down. The chain of command, the sacred text by which he had lived his entire adult life, had been torn up and rewritten in front of his eyes by a small woman in a t-shirt. He watched as she orchestrated the defense of the entire base, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and technical knowledge that dwarfed his own experience. She was speaking a foreign language of expertise, a dialect of command he couldn't even begin to parse. He, who had bellowed and postured, was now a silent, useless spectator. He was a rowboat captain in the presence of an admiral commanding a carrier strike group. The humiliation was so profound, so complete, that it transcended anger and went straight to a cold, hollow shock. Just then, the main door to the TOC burst open again, slamming against its hydraulic closer. This time, it was Colonel Jennings, the base commander, a tall, lean man with the perpetually harried look of someone responsible for 1,000 souls in a hostile land. He was still shrugging into his flak vest, his face grim. "What in the goddamn hell is our response? Why did it take 4 minutes to get a coherent report on the command net?" He roared, his eyes sweeping the room, ready to mete out punishment. He saw the captain, pale and silent. He saw Master Sergeant Miller, looking like he'd seen a ghost. And then he saw the woman at the main console, her back to him, her voice calmly directing the comms sergeant to establish a satellite uplink with CENTCOM headquarters. The colonel stopped. He blinked. He tilted his head, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes, followed by a sudden, dawning wave of recognition that washed over his face, erasing the anger and replacing it with something else entirely. A profound and immediate deference. He straightened his body, his posture snapping from a harried forward lean to a rigid column of military bearing. He took a deep, steadying breath. Then, in a voice that shook the very foundations of the room, a voice that was pure, concentrated command, he bellowed a single phrase: "Attention on deck!" The sound was a physical force, a thunderclap that made the air vibrate. Every soldier in the room, already mesmerized by the woman, reacted without thought. Chairs scraped, boots slammed together, bodies snapped into the rigid, unmoving posture of perfect parade ground attention. Master Sergeant Miller, his training of 25 years overriding his shocked paralysis, pivoted on his heel and locked his body straight, his eyes caged, staring at the far wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. The command was the ultimate signifier of respect, reserved only for the highest echelons of command, for the arrival of a general officer. Miller's mind raced. A general? Here? Now? It was impossible. Colonel Jennings ignored the room. He marched with a stiff, formal gait directly to the main console. He stopped precisely 3 feet behind the woman, who had finally paused her stream of commands. He drew himself up to his full height, brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp and precise it could have cut glass, and held it there, his arm trembling slightly with the force of the gesture. His voice, when he spoke, was laced with a tone of utter, unadulterated respect, the voice of a subordinate addressing a legend. "General Hayes, my apologies, ma'am. The watch report said your arrival wasn't until tomorrow. I didn't realize you were already on the base, let alone in the TOC." The name descended upon the room like a physical weight, a bomb of pure context that rearranged reality for everyone present. General Hayes, not just any general. The name resonated in the silent, attentive minds of the soldiers. General Evelyn Hayes. Sea Dragon. The deputy commander for logistics and support at Central Command. The woman who had rewritten the book on expeditionary warfare. The architect of the lightning-fast supply chains that had sustained operations in 2 separate war zones simultaneously. The strategist who, it was rumored, had once averted a regional crisis by diverting 3 cargo ships and a squadron of C-17s using only a satellite phone and a cocktail napkin. Her picture, a stern, formal portrait, hung in logistics schools and command headquarters across the globe. But in that picture, she was in her decorated Class A uniform. Here, she was a quiet woman in a t-shirt. The dissonance was staggering. Master Sergeant Miller felt the blood drain from his face. A cold, sickening dread, heavy and metallic, pooled in his stomach. General Hayes, he had not just challenged a superior officer. He had screamed at, insulted, and physically intimidated a living legend. He had accused General Evelyn Hayes of being a lost civilian. He had slammed his hand on her desk. He had called her sweetheart. The sheer, catastrophic scale of his misjudgment was so immense he felt dizzy. His career, his reputation, his entire sense of self-worth flashed before his eyes and then winked out of existence. He was no longer Master Sergeant Frank Miller, king of the TOC. He was a footnote in a cautionary tale. He was a dead man walking. General Hayes slowly turned, the first truly relaxed movement she had made since the crisis began. She looked at the ramrod-straight colonel, still holding his salute. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, and returned the salute with a gesture just as crisp, a gesture that spoke of decades of practice. As you were, Colonel. The storm didn't check my itinerary. You have a good team here. They react well to clear instruction. She dropped her salute, and the colonel dropped his. The immediate crisis is managed. The storm will hit in approximately 4 minutes. All we can do now is ride it out, then the real work begins. Her eyes, cool and analytical, swept across the room of frozen soldiers and landed finally on Master Sergeant Miller. She held his gaze for a long, silent moment. He felt pinned by it, dissected, his every failing laid bare. But again, there was no anger in her eyes. There was something far worse. Assessment. The storm hit with the fury of a vengeful god. The world outside the TOC dissolved into a screaming, roaring vortex of sand and wind. The lights flickered violently, then held, a testament to her foresight in rerouting the power. The entire building groaned under the strain, the sound of a million tiny grains of sand scouring the outer walls like a colossal belt sander. For 45 minutes, the world was nothing but darkness and noise. Inside, there was only the steady, calm voice of General Hayes as she received reports, made adjustments, and planned the recovery. She was the anchor in the hurricane. When the wind finally began to subside and the first reports of damage started trickling in, she turned to the still pale colonel. Colonel Jennings, your initial damage assessment teams need to prioritize the integrity of the water purification units and the communications array. I will conduct a full inspection myself, starting at 0500. For now, get your people moving. She then looked past him, her eyes once again finding the Master Sergeant. Master Sergeant Miller, my temporary office, 5 minutes. She turned and walked out of the TOC without a backward glance, leaving a wake of shattered certainties behind her. Miller walked to the small, Spartan office assigned to the visiting general like a man walking to his own execution. He knocked, his hand trembling. "Enter," the same quiet voice commanded. He stepped inside. She was standing by the small window, looking out at the hazy, debris-strewn landscape. She didn't turn around. "Master Sergeant," she began, her tone conversational, clinical. "In your 25 years of service, what is the most critical failure a senior NCO can make?" Miller's mouth was dry. He swallowed hard. Failing to accomplish the mission, ma'am, or failing to safeguard the welfare of my soldiers." "Incorrect," she replied, still facing the window. "Those are results of the failure. The failure itself is more fundamental. The most critical failure is a failure of assessment. to see a situation not for what it is, but for what you expect it to be. To allow prejudice, assumption, or ego to color your analysis of the battle space. She finally turned to face him. Today, you failed to assess. You did not see a person, an unknown variable that required cautious evaluation. You saw a woman in civilian clothes in a place you felt she did not belong. You made an assumption based on gender and attire. Your ego, your sense of territoriality, demanded you react not with inquiry, but with aggression. She took a step closer. He instinctively flinched. This is not about your wounded pride, Master Sergeant, and it is not about my rank. I do not care that you yelled at me. I care that your flawed assessment process created a scene, distracted from the mission, and introduced chaos into my command center moments before a major crisis. Had I been a real threat, an insider threat, a spy, your blustering would have given them precious time to act. Had I been a civilian dignitary, you would have caused a major diplomatic incident. Your prejudice is a tactical vulnerability. It is a flaw in the system, and it needs to be corrected. Miller braced himself for the inevitable. Article 15, reduction in rank, forced retirement, the public humiliation that would follow him for the rest of his life. I understand, General. I'll pack my bags. General Hayes almost smiled. It was a cold, thin expression. Pack your bags? Oh, you'll be packing your bags, Master Sergeant. But you're not going anywhere. Conventional punishment is inefficient. It teaches fear, not understanding. You require a more thorough education. As of this moment, you are relieved of your duties in the TOC. Your new assignment, for the duration of my 2-week inspection tour of this entire theater of operations, is as my personal executive assistant. The words hung in the air, more shocking than any formal punishment. Her assistant? Your duties will include, she continued, ticking points off on her fingers, maintaining my daily schedule, which begins at 0400. You will ensure my briefing materials are prepared and in the correct order. You will be responsible for coordinating with the pilots, drivers, and security details for all my movements. You will take notes in meetings with sector commanders, foreign dignitaries, and staff from the Pentagon. You will stand quietly in the corner while I work. You will see firsthand what competence looks like, regardless of the uniform it wears. You will learn to assess a person based on their actions and their intellect, not their appearance. Your re-education begins now. My first meeting is in 30 minutes. I require a pot of black coffee and the latest satellite imagery of the port facilities at Al Jubail. You are dismissed. For the next 2 weeks, Master Sergeant Frank Miller lived in a state of perpetual, humbling education. He stood in the back of rooms where General Hayes calmly and logically dismantled the arguments of colonels and corrected the strategic plans of other generals. He watched her speak to a local tribal sheikh with fluent, respectful Arabic, then pivot to discussing telemetry data with a NASA engineer via secure video link. He carried her briefing case, a case heavier with classified intelligence than his entire brain. He saw her praise a young private for his innovative solution to a generator problem, and then, in the next hour, dressed down a 3-star admiral for logistical inefficiencies. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of intellect, strategy, and will. And she never once raised her voice. Her authority was not performed. It simply was, radiating from her like heat from a furnace. He learned that her quietness was not weakness, but the focused energy of a mind constantly at work. Her anonymity was not a vulnerability, but a tool, allowing her to observe the truth of a situation before announcing her presence. The story of Master Sergeant Miller and the day he tried to throw General Hayes out of her own TOC became the stuff of legend. It was told in hushed, reverent tones in chow halls and whispered as a cautionary tale to new NCOs. The fable grew with each telling, but the core truth remained. Do not mistake quiet for weak. Do not mistake a lack of decoration for a lack of authority. Years later, Command Sergeant Major Frank Miller, his face now carved with the lines of wisdom rather than arrogance, stood before a class of newly promoted sergeants at the academy. He was considered one of the finest senior NCOs in the service, renowned for his calm demeanor and his almost preternatural ability to assess his soldiers' true potential. "Let me tell you a story," he began, his voice quiet, yet commanding the absolute attention of the room. "It's about the loudest I ever was in my entire life, and the most wrong I've ever been." He told them the story of the haboob, the colonel's salute, and the 2 weeks he spent as an assistant to a legend. He did not spare himself. He detailed his own arrogance, his own prejudice, his own catastrophic failure of assessment. "Your rank," he concluded, his eyes scanning the faces of the young leaders, "gives you the power to give orders. It does not give you authority. Your voice can command compliance. It cannot command respect. True authority, true respect, is earned through competence. It is quiet. It is efficient. It is demonstrated, not declared. Be the person in the room who doesn't need to shout. Be the person whose actions are their argument. Look at the person, not the uniform. Assess the character, not the packaging. The most dangerous person in any room is often the one you don't notice until it's too late. Your job is to notice. Your job is to see." And in that, the lesson of General Evelyn Hayes was passed on. A lesson born of fury and a sandstorm, a lesson in the profound and enduring power of quiet competence. For in the great institutions of the world, in the armies and the boardrooms, the loudest voices may demand attention, but it is the quiet masters, the hidden professionals, who truly shape the world, their authority not worn on a sleeve, but embedded in the very fabric of their being. Their strength is not in the volume of their voice, but in the weight of their silence. A silence that speaks of knowledge, of capability, and of a power so absolute it has no need for advertisement.